Hey folks, Dan Blatz here, coming at you from way out in Quebec, doing a little job here for an employer that I've had. I do some part-time work, but something that's been on my mind. I want to talk to you today a little bit about the error of personal salvation. And that might almost seem like a bit of a contradiction because I'm a strong proponent of personal salvation. I think that you personally need to be saved. You personally need the Lord Jesus Christ. You are personally loved by God the Father, and He gave His Son to die for you personally. However, the church, the evangelical church, has made such a large argument of that they have neglected the idea of corporate salvation. And if you look in the book of Ephesians, for instance, it is absolutely chock full of the words us, we, our. We have obtained an eternal inheritance. We have obtained an inheritance, being predestinated according to the purpose of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His own will, in whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins, according to the riches of His grace, wherein He abounded toward us in all wisdom. So we, us, our corporate salvation, we together have been saved. So just as much as you are made one with God the moment you believe the gospel, you are also made one with the church. It cannot be otherwise. Some people get this mindset that I like Jesus, I just don't like the church. And I can understand that. And I'm not referring to the idea that you have to necessarily be a part of a Sunday morning church worship service at a building with a corporate pastor and all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily my go-to idea of what church is. Church to me is the community of believers. It is all people who believe the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ and have been baptized into His body by the Spirit of God. And I think it's a silly idea to think that the church is all a bunch of hypocrites and therefore I will take Jesus but I don't want the church. It doesn't make any sense. The moment you believe the gospel, you were baptized into the body of Jesus. God, by the Spirit, takes every individual believer and places them into His body. So at the moment of rebirth, at the moment you believe the gospel, you are born again and you are baptized into the body and you become one with Jesus. But at the exact same time, you have also become one with all of us. You and I, if you are a believer in Jesus here today, you and I are just as much one as you and God are one. And so to say, I love Jesus, I just don't love His church, doesn't add up. We like the idea of being one with God. We like the idea of being part of Him because He's perfect. And anytime there's a change that needs to occur, it's us that needs to change, and we're ready to submit to that. We know He loves us. We know He cares for us. He gave His Son to die for us. So we see that as a relationship that we can deal with. Because when I'm wrong, I go to Him, I confess, I make up for, I recognize my need, and I come to Him and say, God, thank you for the salvation. Thank you for the sacrifice You've made for me. But when I'm having an issue with a brother, a sister, a wife, or a son or a daughter who also believes the gospel, it's much more tempting for me then to think, well, I'm glad I'm not one with them. I'm glad I don't have to deal with this. This is their issue. But it's not. You then maybe at some times get to take the God role. You get to forgive even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. That's what it says in Ephesians chapter 4. So in the same way that you have been made one with God through the death of Christ, you have been made one with your brother and sister through the death of Christ. The very thing that was keeping us separated from God, that was taken out of the way so we could become one with Him, was our enmity with Him. We were in trouble with an angry God. We were in trouble by our sin. We had caused grief, and we had caused this separation between us and God. And now God has broken down that wall, and He has made us one with Himself. But in the same way, in Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about how God has now made us one with one another. In Ephesians chapter 3, it speaks about this. The whole book of Ephesians is packed full of this kind of stuff. But I think it would revolutionize our relationships in the church. And it would make us more dependent upon one another. It would help us to see that God knows that we have need one of another. And if you look at the one anotherings in the New Testament, it's everywhere. We're to love one another. We're to be pitiful toward one another. We're to be courteous to one another. We're to be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving, helpful. These are things that we're supposed to do, not in order to try to become one with one another. You understand that? It's the same way with salvation. You are not trying to obey God so that you can be saved. You're not trying to obey God so you can be one with Him. You are one with God, therefore you obey. You are one with God, therefore you try to walk in accordance with His will. Well, you are one with your brothers and sisters. We are to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. We already are one. You cannot undo that. You cannot say, I want nothing to do with church. I want nothing to do with Christians because this, that, the other thing. I understand people hurt you. They let you down. And you might have to take the higher road and be the one to forgive, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. That's going to happen no matter what. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're going to have to forgive and let go and deal with, not so that you can become more one with one another, but rather so that you can keep that unity that God has already created for us. God has made you one with the church. The moment you believe the gospel, you are one with His believers. You are one body. We're baptized together. We have been planted together in the likeness of His death, and we shall also be raised together in the likeness of His resurrection. This is chock full, and the New Testament is chock full of this kind of teaching. You cannot escape the idea that the church is absolutely critical and crucial to your future. You will spend eternity with them, and that's why we're supposed to grow in the unity. That's why we're supposed to be grounded and established in this truth, because we all get our nourishment from the head. The whole body gets the nourishment from the head, which is Christ. And we, as the church, are one. We're not trying to become one. We're not trying to unify through dressing the same or looking the same or singing the same or acting the exact same way. We are already one, and therefore we're keeping the peace. We're keeping that peace in the bond of perfection. Anyway, so much more could be said, but I think you get the general idea. The church is one body, and we are members in particular. And you ought to recognize that you need the rest of the body. It would be ridiculous for one member of a body to think that it doesn't need another, or to think that it's more important than another. We all are one together because of the gospel, and we're not trying to become one. God has done this for us. It's a gift of salvation. You have been made one with the church by the sacrifice of Jesus. God bless.